ladies and gentlemen, today we were asked to prepare and to share with you some information regarding the history of instructional time in Creighton School District. As you know, the issue of instructional time and how it's invested to support student achievement continues to be a point of discussion among many of our stakeholders. So in order to frame this clearly, I wanted to go back and give you insight and just some information about where we were when this really became a point of discussion for us. And that goes back to 2008. At that time, and I'm looking at slide 3, we were, as a district, we had one failing school. We had 6 underperforming schools, and we had 2 schools whose school labels were performing. And if you remember from the earlier presentation, there was the different system in place to label schools at that time. And that's where we found ourselves. We also knew that based on the performance of our students that we needed to provide significant levels of intervention for students who were struggling. We knew that there was a need to provide academic intervention during the school day, and that was based on analysis of best practice research that says that the only true intervention is one that's mandatory, that's built into the day. You can't expect it to be an intervention if it's optional in a before and after school model. And we knew that because we had been and would continue to be focusing intensely on reading and math in alignment to the goals that were at that time linked to No Child Left Behind, we had little or no time in our instructional day for the teaching of science and social studies. We also were in the midst of program implementation for ELD and the 4-hour model. And that 4-hour model includes a very prescribed approach to the allocation of instructional time in support of English language acquisition. In addition to that, our school schedules had inconsistent amounts of time devoted to content areas. They also had inconsistent and varying amounts of time for special area courses. Also, at that same time, Phoenix Elementary School District and several other Phoenix districts underwent an audit and were found to be out of compliance with the amount of minutes of instruction that were expected to be provided. The result in the case of Phoenix Elementary District was that they had to repay about $760,000 back to the state because of non-compliance, particularly at the middle school level. Essentially, they didn't have a sufficient amount of minutes of instruction built into their school day, and of course they're compensated for having enrolled students for a particular number of days at a certain level. The slide before you now shows the state recommended minutes of instruction. These were prepared and shared in November of 2008 as all this information was coming together, so that you can see based on each content area there is a set of a recommended number of minutes per day and per week that students should receive. I'd like to draw your attention to the bulleted and underlined sentence at the bottom, or near the bottom of the slide, which says that the school week should consist of 1,800 minutes of instruction at both the primary and upper elementary levels. So with that context in mind, we underwent as a district leadership a process in which we internally evaluated our structures and systems in connection to those issues that we were facing. We examined the schedules of all of our schools. We reviewed academic achievement results, similar to what we've done now today. We analyzed best practice research. We wanted to find out what was being said about the best ways in which to tackle all of these challenges. We studied the Arizona Department of Education guidelines regarding instructional hours and programming. We shared information about these issues with the Meet and Confer team, and we made a recommendation at that time to the board to increase the number of instructional minutes per day. Where are we now? So in the time that has passed since then, please note that, as I showed in that prior slide, ADE recommends 1,800 instructional minutes per week. Our current school schedule has 1,830 instructional minutes per week, which amounts to an additional 6 minutes per day of instruction in excess of the ADE recommended instructional minutes.
Did I see too, I'm sorry, did I see that it recommends 1,800 but only requires 1,600? Is that what that said on that last slide? State recommended minutes of, I don't understand why it says on the far right column, 1,600.
Which slide are you?
Uh,
7.
Thank you.
I'm gonna call Ed to help us with this question.
I don't understand why there's a 1,600 here and then 1,800 there.
If you take a look at the ADE's recommended, it's 1,800 recommended minutes, and it states that 150 to 200 minutes of instruction time per week be used at the discretion of teacher for such things as response to intervention, disaggregated instruction, things like that.
Okay.
So the total of the content areas that are identified here, starting with developmental reading and going down to health, is how you get your 1,600. But those additional, that difference
Okay.
comes from that discretionary.
Right, thank you.
And another question about Phoenix L. They were out of compliance. How many minutes did they have? What was the difference between the recommendation and what they had that resulted in the fine?
Number one, they weren't out of compliance with the recommendation, they were out of compliance with the ADE's ARS statute of requirements for specific minutes. There are still requirements that are much less than the 1,800 hours, or 1,800 minutes. They were actually below the actual required minutes by several hundred minutes a week.
What's the required, then what is what are the required minutes as opposed to the?
I would have to look them up, I apologize, I don't have them with me right now, but I can look them up in just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would like to say as a point of clarification, the initial, we paid the $760,000, but part of that was forgiven, and when they had to pay, it wasn't $760,000.
And I believe that right around that same period, Roosevelt was also found out of compliance, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So at this time, as shared, we do meet or exceed slightly the the recommendations for content areas in all grade levels. This slide shows.
What, can I ask,
Yes, please.
so the 1,600 minutes are the content areas, the minimum requirements.
Mhm.
Then the additional 200 minutes is for the discretion of the teacher, where we have 30 additional minutes above and beyond those 6 additional minutes per day approximately that we've chosen to utilize as part of our RTI model. And then some, right? So we've got teacher planning time and some other collaborative opportunities. So when you say meet or exceed content area recommendations, you mean above and beyond the 16, the recommended specific area, so we're more than 1,600 minutes. As in, language arts is a minimum of 300 minutes in this recommendation. What do you know off the top of
Sure,
your head?
we have, and in fact, these are our
All right, so
actual.
those are these are our actual instructions.
This is the actual
Okay,
guidance
thank
that
you.
was given to all schools
Got it.
for developing the 13-14 master course schedules.
Got it.
So you can see, and then let me orient you to this graphic. The ELD courses are on the left, and those are state required. There's no negotiation in terms of those.
On your right.
On my left. Non-ELD.
On your right.
Mainstream. I think of them as mainstream ELD. So your non-ELD, your mainstream are on the left, your ELD courses are on the right. And you can see how our course schedules are structured. You know, with language arts in particular, we have 90 minutes built into the regular day. This is the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday schedule. Wednesdays looks a little different. Is Wednesday?
I have a question.
Sure.
In the state recommended minutes of instruction for elementary schools, you've got 60 minutes a week for art, 60 minutes a week for music, and 60 minutes a week for health. Do all our students get all of that?
They do not. We do not currently offer
And that's
health.
within the 1,600 minutes, and they're not getting all of that. So there's actually more than 30 minutes discretionary for the teachers if they're not getting those, if they're not getting 180 minutes a week.
At this time, our course offerings for special areas include physical education twice per week. Our special area periods are 45 minutes in length each day. So they get physical education twice a week, art once a week, music once a week, and technology. And technology is not identified on this list.
So no help, and they have.
We do have a new adopted human growth and development curriculum which will be implemented, which satisfies some of those requirements or some of those recommendations.
So 45 minutes a day are for specials, and you said PE 2 times, art once, technology once. So what's the 5th day?
Music.
Oh, music.
So you do.
And we offer, those specials are for all students every day. They're in the schedule.
So that includes then the early release day of Wednesday?
That is correct.
And what does the early release day on Wednesday look like if it's not 390 minutes?
So I don't have the Wednesday examples in here. They're the same structure. The difference is that the content minutes are shortened by specific amounts of time. They still get all the same content, but just for a shorter period. But we keep consistent the lunch period, the specialist period, because the specialist period is when we have teacher prep and collaborative planning.
And so everything else besides the lunch, the specials are reduced basically proportionally?
Truncated, yes.
Okay.
Slide 11 shows what it looks like at the middle school level. So please note that there are differences, but they do match our recommendations. So based on the conditions at the time and the conditions under which this inquiry was launched, we really began to pay attention to, we had always paid attention to, but we gave extra focus and intention to looking at how all of these minutes were invested for purposes of instruction. And we were trying to solve some huge problems. Yes.
Quick question. Where does a teacher's duty-free prep period, how does that fit in with this?
The duty-free prep.
Special time.
Oh, okay, it is during specials. Thanks.
Are there other questions about the schedule documents? I know there's a lot of information there. Any terms that? So at the
Did you talk at all about when we did do the inquiry about the inconsistencies?
that's coming up. I think, if I don't get there, remind me. At that time, there's a lot of research on time on learning. What we found there's a couple things that really stood out for us. We knew, based on the audit findings for Phoenix L, that we had to increase the amount of teacher contact time with students. But the research said it's not just about putting more minutes in the day. You can make it all of it. That's not the critical issue. The critical issue is what happens during that learning time. So that was one piece. The research kind of defines that by saying there's the allocated time. That's the minutes on this grid. And then there's the engaged time. That's the T4S. That's the curriculum. It's the interactions, the engagements that the students have. And so with that in mind, we moved forward with a host of other things that enabled us to really make that allocated time as engaged and meaningful as possible. Because again, keep in mind, we were trying to not only get compliant, we were trying to address those achievement issues related to the performance of our students, which though we're facing challenges today, The challenges we were looking at 5 years ago were significant. I don't know that they were significant. I'll say that.
And all take over by the state.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and I was the principal of the failing school that year, so I mean, if we wanted to have a personal level conversation about how difficult it was an emergency, and that's putting it lightly. So, we're in a much different position today, but we still have challenges to address, which we talked about prior, we can clearly see. But at that time, in order to address that notion of engaged time and not just put more minutes in the day, we implemented that increased contact time with our students. We added the breakfast in the classroom and fresh fruit and vegetable snack program. So we started feeding everybody at the beginning of the day. We started making sure that every child could have a fresh fruit and vegetable snack a minimum of 4 days a week. And that's just built into the afternoon course of activities. We standardized the master course schedule for all schools. So this set of minutes that you see became the standard, and it was not optional for all schools in designing their course schedules. We standardized the amount, the number of instructional minutes that were to be allocated and invested at each school in each content area. And we created dedicated time for all of the elements of response to intervention, which include our Tier 1 core, our Tier 2, which is additional time, and then Tier 3, which is additional time upon that to support the needs of our lowest achieving students. In addition to that, we implemented our curriculum with the essential the essential standards and the pacing calendars. We implemented our system of assessments, which include, we added to the system of assessments because we had been doing some federally benchmarking or blueprinting prior to that. But then we added the common formative assessments, which were generated at the teacher level. And that's when we began our work with exemplar strategies such as the CT4S and ELA, which is another professional development module that came to us as a part of the West Ed Ellis partnership. It's about English language learning and the language arts. We also standardized our special area courses in minutes so that I can describe to you that all students in Creighton School District receive PE twice per week, music, art, and technology. We provided dedicated time for 45 minutes of common grade level planning or prep on a daily basis.
I have a question about that. So that's different than the 45 minutes the teachers have during specials?
That is the time when students are in specials.
But that time, they're supposed to be meeting with other team members and looking at data, or do they have a chance to actually, work on lesson plans and walk away with a product?
The way that the time is structured is that right now, they meet once per week with their teams for the purposes of collaborative instructional planning during this time. They meet another time during the week for purposes of data analysis. Now that will likely change because we've changed the structure of our pacing calendars. So instead of implementing a common formative assessment every week, one in reading, one in math, one in reading, one in math, there's some variation in that frequency and some greater time between the formative assessments. So there will be a bit of structural change, I think, as leadership teams at each school determine the best frequency for that data analysis to take place. But that is the current structure as it stands.
And on Wednesday, is it also 45 minutes? The early release day?
The special areas are 45 minutes on Wednesdays, yes.
On Wednesdays as well.
I want to make sure I get this right. The way the pacing calendars have been laid out with the formative assessments, they're less frequent, correct? The formative assessments typically are less frequent,
That is correct.
which
They're less frequent.
which potentially could have a dramatic increase on the frequency of those collaborative meetings, correct?
What, do you mean like an increase?
Well, because we were doing one every week, some of them now are happening every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. So in terms of having the data to look at,
That is correct. So what we're trying to do in connection to the earlier conversation about autonomy, teacher professionalism, teacher competence, is expand the instructional cycle a little bit. So we've been on a really tight, every 8 or 9 day teaching an essential performance objective, and then testing that, evaluating those results, regrouping the students, and doing a reteach and enrich block. Our calendar has, what we've done intentionally is extend that cycle, because Common Core isn't so much about breaking learning down into tiny little sub-objectives. It's about creating conceptual linkages between big ideas, right? And being able to write about it and explain it and so forth. So we believe, based on our experience and the work of our teachers, that we need to provide a more expanded instructional cycle to do that. So that's the long answer to this point, which is yes, it will have, the leadership teams are going to have to work at their schools to make decisions about how frequently to engage in both the planning piece and the data review piece.
Could I just make a quick linkage, especially for you, Jeannie, on this? As the curriculum cabinet did this work and knew that they were, part of this was coming back to that issue of autonomy, flexibility, professionalism. So even with Form Bs, which is not the purpose of this, those will be level decided. Be decided when those are given. Those are not on the calendar. There's a time frame within there, but so those will be less, because part of what happened was by having one of those every week, they became summative in nature, in people's minds, instead of formative, and people were then gearing up towards that test only. And if we do that, given the Common Core, it's going to be bad.
Yeah, so, I mean, and I know we're talking about minutes of instruction, so this means that we're still going to have common formative, uniform, common formative assessments across the district on this regular basis with Common Core standards?
Yes, we are.
And are they going to look like the CFAs have looked as far as
No, they do
being
not. In
multiple
fact,
choice?
They've been reconstructed significantly in the following ways. They do still include some multiple choice elements. They've had the addition of short answers, extended responses being added. They do not at this time they have also performance-based items where students may have to construct or engage in some sort of physical representation of their learning. So
Right.
they look dramatically different than the CFAs of the past. And that was part of the rationale. And we want to implement Common Core successfully. We want our students to do really well when they take part. And so what we have control over are these assessments.
Are they done online? Are they done digitally the way that Common Core is going to be implemented? I mean, the PARCC assessments are going to be implemented?
We have we have some capacity to do that in
Like in
certain
the flipped
classrooms for
classrooms,
certain parts
right?
of them, yes. We will still collect the performance data via our ATI system.
And I don't want to take up
I
time
was
because
gonna say,
this is a different
we
subject,
should probably
right?
come back and put
But I would
the
love to-
assessment process and program on an agenda.
And I would
so
love
that
to
we
see,
can- Because, I mean, we're in progress here. So much depends, not that I am advertising for anything, but so much depends on what happens in November. Not only in terms of the technology question that you asked, but also in terms of one of our other systemic issues when you look at our student performance, which we were previously talking about, is materials that are appropriate and aligned to the level of text complexity and rigor that our kids are going to use. Anyway, we probably need to talk about that.
Well, and not to talk about assessments exactly in the way that we've been talking about them, but back to this idea of dedicated time each day for teachers to work together in collaborative teams. Because, right, what we ask teachers to do in their collaborative teams should be the 4 questions of professional learning communities. What do we want students to know? How do we know that they know it? What do we do if they don't? What do we do if they do? Right, so each and every time they meet, regardless of the particular focus of the meeting, they're addressing one of those 4 questions. To me, I think that opportunity, again, to put the professionalism back in the work that we're asking teachers to do in those collaborative times is just because we have changed the structure of the district common formative assessments does not mean that our teachers aren't going to be creating additional common formative assessments in their own collaborative work. Right now, they have an opportunity to say, wow, we created a common, check for understanding at the beginning of the period, and then we're all going to analyze the results across our classrooms. Or we created a common, bell work activity, and we're going to, see how well our students do. So in reality, the structure of our district CFAs changing really just provides for more teacher-developed common formative assessments that are really directly specific to the students that they have in their classroom. So they still have an opportunity to analyze data. It's just that the data is data they create, as opposed to the data that comes from the district.
In fact, what we're hoping
Driven.
to be able to do through our professional development process, the coaching, the work with teachers and leaders is build the capacity to do just that. Because we've been looking at our assessment system as a whole, and we've been looking at how you create a balanced assessment system that includes long cycle assessments, things like Ames and Park, and then everything that's in the middle, all the way down to what's very, very short cycle, which is what Dr. Lasco Curtis described. So those quick checks for understanding that teachers make in the moment, but in an informed way, in order to know, really be able to answer two questions. One is, did they understand and learn what I just taught? And what do I need to do next to make sure that they are able to move forward, so that they continue to move forward? And that's where we want to focus a tremendous amount of our efforts. And what we know from the past work of the 5 years we've just completed is that when we build a set of assessments, in this case the CFAs, it gives so much insight to our teachers about how to check for understanding. And then they take that as kind of a framework, and then they have to deconstruct it. They have to put it into every single lesson plan. They have to put it into every minute of learning almost, in order to really, and it builds their skills tremendously. So we have great confidence in the revisions to our CFAs as a vehicle for providing additional opportunities for insight for our teachers, because they really value and are driven by the check for understanding data that they can collect from their students. So, as I move forward,
Could I just say one thing that we do struggle with, and I think our teachers struggle with as well, is that balance between that collaborative planning and data analysis and individual planning and analysis. And that's just a reality. Some of you have probably already heard that, but it's something that we struggle with, finding that balance all the time. And so looking at, the reason I posed the question regarding the pacing calendars and the assessments is it potentially could provide additional time for some of that individual planning that teachers are requesting. That's why I brought it up.
I do want to provide one correction. I believe copies have been distributed. The 30-minute Wednesday, the Wednesday schedule is here, and it does show 30 minutes for the special, so I was mistaken in the 45 minutes.
I just want to make a comment about the individual planning time of the teachers. Originally, we were told that it was 45 minutes a day when the children are at specials, and then we were told, well, 2 days a week they're doing planning, when they're doing collaborative, and also, do the teachers bring their children to the specials? Do they walk them to the specials?
The structures at the schools dictate how those transitions are handled. Each of our schools vary significantly in
Normally,
layout.
they walk them to the,
Depends on the
probably the
grade level.
majority, yeah, they walk them. So that
Especially in
takes time
science.
away. So if it's 45 minutes and they're walking them to the specials, that's maybe another 5 each way. So you're really looking at 35 minutes. And then if, and especially with a longer school day, I just want my other board members to think about that with the longer school day. When really do they get to sit down and individually plan?
When is the professional day over? So like if school is dismissed at 3:10, is it 3:10 all the schools?
3:05 and 1:05
3:05.
on Wednesday. Wednesdays.
So then, what is the expectation for each individual teacher? How long do they have to be at that campus, you know?
Dr. Lugo, can you assist me in answering that? There's language that's used to describe it consistently.
So we're very hesitant to put in exact hours for teachers because teachers are exempt professionals. So the professional day really ends with their professional duties. And we have language in our meet and confer document from 3 years ago that I can pull up for you if you'd like and get that to Dr. Boyle that really explains what professional duties are asked of teachers, but they can come and go as required once the students leave.
And that is an issue that, I don't mean to reopen any old wounds. I'm the only member of the board currently who was on the board at the time that we voted by a margin of 3-2 to extend the school day. And I think that some of the information, I was one of those who voted against it. I felt that some of the information that we were given was not necessarily good information, or that it may have just been overwhelming in terms of the amount of information and may have been confusing. I'm not saying that there was any deliberate effort to mislead anyone, but my recollection was that we could be in a situation where teachers would have to arrive as soon or as late as, maybe 10 minutes before the bell rang and leave, 10 minutes after. And my recollection is that that has not been the case. Or my understanding is that that's really not the case. I mean, teachers have bus duty in the morning, they have other things as assigned, and that may vary depending on the campus. The other thing is that over the years through Meet and Confer, we've had things that have been brought up like, and the reason I placed this on an agenda is because I think this is closely related to our teacher turnover, how much we put on teachers. I want us to have the quality and sufficient quantity of instructional time for our students to learn. But I also understand that we are jamming it into a 180-day school day, or 180-day school year. A lot of countries and some other districts now in Arizona are going longer, 200, so they maybe can breathe a little bit as they're doing this along the way. But I'm not sure where I was going with this train of thought. But we've also been told over the years through Meet and Confer, as this has, I think, added to the turnover rate for our teachers. And I understand the need to have adequate time for our students to learn, but we also have to have adequate time for our teachers to prep if we want them to be good. We had debates. We had police officers, for those of you who weren't on the board, who escorted us out to our cars. We had to walk through picketers in order to get to our governing board meetings after this. We had a former governing board member who, there were a lot of comments that were made. One person who got up and spoke and said that teachers shouldn't complain because they get paid more than the average wage in Arizona, which is actually really pretty low. I mean, it is Arizona. And that they only work 35 hours a week and they get their summers off. So it was all those things that we hear. And, I think it was difficult for us to get beyond that rhetoric. And even then, we have tried. There are things we have done that I didn't see in the presentation, but I do want to mention that we've, since extending the day, we actually went back and took 5 minutes off at the end of the day. So we actually shortened it again. So that's, 25 minutes a week that we shortened it. Plus we reduced the Wednesday early release by an hour. So that's another 60. So 85 minutes a week. We have shortened the school week since we first lengthened the school year. So we've done some things to address that. I think in the Meet and Confer process, we've tried to make sure that we still maintain all of these minutes of instruction, but that we have adequate prep time, which I've heard brought up here, that we have had that duty-free prep time, the duty-free lunch as much as possible, but I think there's nothing in meet and confer, whereas in Phoenix Union, teachers, and Jeannie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but teachers sign a professional development. And there are a lot of things, I had it sent to me. Special agreement, okay.
Yeah.
That professional agreement. And it is 155 pages long, something like that. It's huge. They kill a lot of trees. But everything's laid out in there. I mean, I think it's even how many kids you can have in your class and how many, certain hours. And I know that things that come out of meet and confer, nothing's really in writing. We don't vote on anything. And it seems to me there's nothing that stops a site administrator from saying, yeah, that's our general policy, but, today I need you to do this during your prep period. And then, okay, maybe that happens once in a while, but then where do you set the parameters on that growing to where teachers really, in addition to having this large amount of time, they have to be teaching, their prep time is taken away. And it's a lot like, and I'll get off my soapbox here in just a moment, but it's a lot like being an actor, to use an analogy. None of us would go to a play and say, oh, hey, this actor is on stage 3 nights a week for 2 hours. I mean, that's a 6-hour work week. That's a nice short work week. You don't just get up there and have the lines magically appear to you. Any more than what happens with teachers. So I guess that's my concern, and not just the minutes of instruction, but overall the difficulty in how this plays in with teacher retention.
So I'd like, if you don't mind, thank you for the context.
Yes.
Because obviously I don't have that background and perspective. I do have a slightly different, but parallel, again, across a couple of major streets perspective. And in terms of a professional agreement and the idea of what that means, I hope that we as a district never get to the point where we are negotiating the number of minutes in contact that teachers have with kids, which we did in my previous school district. Down to the exact minute that I had to have teachers looking at kids to make sure that they were safe walking between classes, as an example. And that if a teacher had more than the number of contact minutes, that was a grievable circumstance. I hope that we don't ever get to the point where we deprofessionalize the profession of teaching in our district, because I think that is also a bit dangerous. The fact that we have been able to preserve both time for teachers and time for students in our academic day, and do that in a way that gives opportunities for collaboration is something that school districts across the country are struggling to figure out how to do. And apparently we've done it with some consternation and other concerns, obviously, that we need to be aware of. So some of it might be just this idea of what is collaborative planning and what is the expectation of that, and do we need to help provide, again, something that makes it clear for people to understand that, as we expect teachers to work in a collaborative working environment, implementing professional learning communities as a concept, the benefit is that when they plan in a collaborative way, that there's benefit to everybody at the table. And quite honestly, if that's not the case in a collaborative team, then it should be the collaborative team that addresses individuals who aren't bringing and sharing the wealth, if you will, in terms of creating lessons and units and analyzing data. Having said that, there's clearly a need to have somebody make copies and get your stuff ready and to be ready for instruction in your day. And so I think it's a bit of a balance. Rick DeFore talks a lot about, and he's the primary author of the PLC, structure and movement that we utilize in the district. He talks about, the tyranny of or and the genius of and. Right? That we need to think about how can we make things an and as opposed to an or. That it shouldn't be individual planning or collaborative planning. It should be how do we make sure that teachers have the opportunity to do both. And if that means individual campuses, coming up with creative ways, or dedicating a day, or dedicating a portion of the day, or whatever that looks like, then I think we should give teachers the autonomy in their building, working with their administrators to figure out what makes sense for them, because they're all unique and individual. But the fact that we have instructional time that's dedicated to improve student achievement is amazing, and we need to keep that. What I'd like to see, not in addition to time, but really thinking about what the research says is, it really isn't about how much time it is, it's what we do with the time. Right, so an organization, an individual will waste as much time as we give them if they're inclined to waste time. And an organization or an individual will use their time wisely no matter how much time we give them. Right, and I can think of my own personal experiences where some days I do a better job with the time that I have, and other days I don't. So what I'd love to see as part of our progress monitoring of how effective we are with time are things like, do we see bell-to-bell instruction? Because one of the strategies I don't see being presented, and it might be quite honestly there, it's just not something that came to the forefront, is do we have teachers teaching from bell to bell? Do we have high quality instruction happening for as long as we have kids in our classrooms in each one of them? My own observation of visiting lots and lots of schools across the state is that no matter what time the day ends, I see kids walking, and this is not a Creighton specific issue, so I'm just generalizing. Just to be clear, I don't have any examples on our own campuses of this. But that just means I haven't been to enough campuses yet, probably. But I see kids, if the school day ends at 3:10, walking out with their parents or getting ready to go to the bus or standing in line to get on the bus at 3 o'clock. Well, that's 10 minutes of instruction every single day that we're missing. And oftentimes those are our students who need it the most, like our special education students, for whom we want them to get to where they need to go in a safe and orderly way without being, engaged in the whole milieu of the end of the day dismissal. And quite honestly, then they're missing out on way more instruction than we intend on paper to see. So my worry is we see what we have on paper, but I don't know that we have a way to monitor, do we actually get those instructional minutes, implemented as effectively as we can. So I'd rather, I guess, have a conversation around how can we measure the quality of the time and the usefulness of the time that we have as opposed to the time itself, because quite honestly, that's really, I think, where we need to as a board maybe worry about is, do we have highly engaging lessons from the beginning of the period to the end of the period that have students working with the content as much as we possibly can, because if not, just the fact that we have a 60-minute period for language arts doesn't matter if 20 minutes of that time is really wasted for our students. And I'm glad I have not had to go through picketers, so let's please keep it that way. If we can avoid picketing, that would be lovely.
Related to the connection between collaborative and individual preparation, we have many examples across the board. As people have worked through this and found their way, they've found the utility in the collaborative process. And when I was a principal in the district, I had numerous teams who, by their own accord, requested additional collaborative time with their coach. And the reason they did that was because of the utility of that time. So they were happy to meet. She couldn't meet with them during every one of their specials periods in the week. So they came in at lunch and had working lunch sessions twice a week in addition, because of and I had, again, multiple teams did this, because of the value. And they came out of those meetings with useful information, plans of action, materials to share. And I think that in addition to the quality of the instructional time, quality of the planning time and the processes that are used to make it effective is a really important point of inquiry for us. And that's something that I take personally because it is part of the work of our department in building the implementation of the strategic.
Just as an FYI, in the back of that section, there's some reading material if you want. We have additional material, but that's just some that was looked at that time when the decisions to expand the school day.
And I'm not trying to reopen this, I want the board, again, having been the only one here who went through the picket lines and have the, I want everyone to have that perspective on how we got to where we are, and that I do think that it's a relevant issue to discuss as we're discussing teacher retention in the future, and ways in which, not trying to say let's go back and remake decisions that have been made, but just understanding what we've done as a district to try to improve student achievement, and how hard it has been on everyone. And I do have a white card from Renee Sandler-Shamblin for this, but I don't see her.
She left.
Okay. So we will not be calling her up. Are there any other further, thank you, Mr. Gutman. Are there any further questions, comments? If not, I will recess us for lunch.
Rhetorical. No, I wasn't.
That's not bad.
Could be.